The views presented in this program are not meant to express the specific views of the Lafayette Bible Fellowship. You are listening to the Vigilance Radio Network.
You are listening to Truth Time with Pastor Monty.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
I do have a very particular set of skills. Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You want answers? You can't handle the truth!
The problem is having the right worldview and acting upon it. The worldview that gives men and women the truth of what is.
Welcome to Truth Time with Pastor Monty, a show where two pastors from different generations talk about truth in today's culture. At the top of the show today, let's go ahead and spread this content by liking and sharing it and making sure that you're subscribed to our show. And for all of you on YouTube, hit the bell so you can be informed of all upcoming shows. The Truth Time with Pastor Monty broadcast is a part of the Lafayette Bible Fellowship's online podcast network of shows called the VRN. If you're interested in this ministry or our other shows, you can check us out at abfpdx.org, where you can access more resources, donate, and learn more about ABF and our local church in Portland, Oregon. And now that all of that is said, I'm Pastor Josh, the senior pastor over at ABF, and your co-host for this show, and this is Pastor Monty.
Welcome to Truth Time. I am Pastor Monty, and I'm sitting here with Pastor Josh, and today we're going to be covering a number of fascinating issues as we look at real life and how we are impacted by life as believers. But let's start out by getting into the Christ factor. So we're in Colossians, and we're in the second second chapter of Colossians, and we are picking up at verse 6. And this is just a wonderful passage that the Apostle Paul now begins to elaborate on who we are in Christ. And so he says, so then, just as you received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in him, rooted and built and strengthened in the faith as you were taught, with overflowing with thankfulness. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow or deceptive philosophy, which depends on the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. For in Christ all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form, and in Christ you have been brought to fullness. He is the head of every authority, over every authority. In him you were also circumcised with not a circumcision performed by human hands. Your whole self, ruled by the flesh, was put off when you were circumcised by Christ, having been buried, with which you were also raised with him through faith in which is working in God who raised him from the dead. There's a lot there, and so we'll go back. I'm hopeful, but I don't think that we'll get to the part talking about circumcision. I do love that discussion on circumcision. Mm-hmm. But we start out in verse 6. So then, just as you received Christ Jesus, continue to live in him, your lives being rooted and built and strengthened in the faith as you were taught. So, I would say that this is one of the key passages. There are many passages, I suppose, that you could say are key in Colossians, but this is clearly one passage that applies even today as we talk with believers about who they are in Christ, and the importance of understanding that the life that we live as disciples of Christ is not an event, but it is a process that God, through his Holy Spirit, takes us as we walk on to maturity. In my experience as a believer, having observed many aspects of different church lives, remember that my background is fairly eclectic. So I grew up in the Disciples of Christ Christian Church. I've worshiped and participated in worship at Lutheran churches. I'm a conservative Baptist. I pastored a conservative Baptist church for many years, but I'm ordained as a North American Baptist. I mean, the list goes on and on. I'm just eclectic and not tied to one particular belief system. But I've noticed that there are many individuals who view their lives in Christ oftentimes as an event.
Yes.
and they kind of stop there. So you ask them, are they a believer? And they can point to a conversion event.
Yeah.
But sadly, sometimes it stops there.
Yeah, I don't think even I don't know that that's even the case anymore. Like, I think that.
How do you mean?
Most believers are post-conversion. How do you say that? Most believers in this day and age seem to be non-conversion, personal experience, like ethereal. No actual event, just sort of a nebulous, amorphous, like blob of.
So they don't even have something they can hearken back to?
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think a lot of believers, they think. I think a lot of believers think of their Christianity as something that is outside the realm of meaningful space and time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, especially in the progressive realm where it's like, we believe in Christ, but it's more of a universal consciousness.
So I hear you. So does that explain the reason why many people seem to be unanchored then?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
As you talk to various individuals in their various growth stages in their walk with Christ, oftentimes people seem to be unanchored.
Well, I think you can go back to John, who also, the Apostle John, who also was dealing with a type of like proto-Gnosticism that Paul is dealing with in Colossians. And he makes it clear that you have to link your faith with the event of Christ's death on the cross.
Yes.
And the meaningful effect of Christ in real space and real time, as a real person. And a lot of believers back then, as is now, are starting to disconnect their faith from that. So Christ isn't actually, whether Christ actually happened doesn't matter so much as how I feel about the idea of Christ happening. So they're saying there's no actual event that matters. So then for them, there's nothing that actually matters.
Yeah, and so it's just kind of a vicious circle where if you unchain yourself from the cross of Calvary and the fact that it occurred in space and time, which the Gospels are very clear, that is a significant moment, and it did occur in space and time through the person of Jesus Christ. If you're unlinked to that, and theologically, if your theology is that way, then it seems that you would also have that problem in applying it personally to your own life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where, at least in my experience in this day and age, currently, you were pastoring at the end of an era of Christianity. Because if you look at the height of evangelical Christianity, it was like toward the end of the 80s, early 90s, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
And so you're pastoring a church toward the end of that era where people had a general Christian consensus and they were starting to play with the truth. But the era that we are in right now, pastorally, is in sort of a post-truth era.
Okay.
So I think that's that's where we're at. Is most Christians they don't we'll call it quibble over the details of their Christianity.
Sure. And with that, I would just give a shameless plug that you guys should be praying for Pastor Josh, because that's a hard arena to minister within.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's a hard arena. But if we go back to Colossians here, for example, and there are other places in the writings of the Apostle Paul where he definitely places an anchor, and he says, you need to continue to live as you were taught. And the Hebrew people, if you look at Israel and you look at the history of Israel, every time there was a significant event, God commanded that an altar be built. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of even at the crossing of rivers, in the middle of a river in Israel, you will find a memorial to an event that God required be built there, because he required that memorials be built for the purpose of the people remembering him and his goodness to them. And in the same way, as believers, I personally believe it's really important for believers to take stock of the work of God within their lives and how God has ministered to them, and that they should do that at the very least on a quarterly basis throughout the year. So I normally when I have a birthday or something like that, I'm going to think about, wow, I'm getting old. I'm getting old. But what has God been doing in my life, and what has he done this last year, and how can I see him working, and those types of things are really important to stabilize and strengthen my life as a mature believer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should happen every day, every morning and every evening and every other time. I think that's the like we look at food.
Well, sometimes need it more. Some people need it more than others.
I think you look at food, and like one of the things in I'll be vulnerable. One of the things in my personal journey with food is understanding the need to pray for your food, specifically to give thanks for it. Right?
I agree with that.
And just understanding what food is and nourishment and where it comes from, and so I think that's a factor in it. We also see in Paul's writing in or maybe it's James. Yeah. Well, we see it all over the place. Like I think of Paul in Philippians, where he talks about be anxious for nothing, but in everything give thanks. Right? So I think what you're talking about there can really play into the idea of thanks, and if you approach God with thanks, then a lot of the problems that you have as a Christian begin to naturally fade away, because the anxiety that comes from holding all the burdens and all the things that need to be accomplished and all the things that as a finite creature become difficult because we live moment to moment, those things can go away. And I think that's why God calls us specifically to be in memorial to him all the time, to remember. It's always to remember. And when we look at sin, habitual sin specifically, what we see is it's always connected to not remembering God as God, not remembering that he's in the problem with you, not remembering. That's when I'm counseling, that's what I'm constantly dealing with, is somebody has allowed their situation to deteriorate because they chose not to worship God as God in that moment.
Right, and they feel alone in their issue.
Right, instead of remembering the goodness of who God is. And it's funny because that's something even the world from a secular standpoint, like values, you know, like you have like Eastern mysticism calls you to center yourself, for instance.
Sure.
You know, like they want you to empty yourself, but like only think good thoughts, positive thoughts into the world and center yourself, right? That is a counterfeit version of what we're talking about here in Scripture and giving thanks to God. But that is, even the world gets that concept.
Well, yeah. In fact, when I was in the corporate world, there was a big push for people to use calendars.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
And there's this company that's based out of Utah that's very big in the calendar thing, and one of the things that they promote is that you center yourself with your calendar. And you become one with it every day. I mean, they make kind of like a little ritual out of it, Yeah. It's amazing.
Every day I haven't taken the time because it's not worth it to me to figure out when it does this on my watch. But I have an Apple Watch, and every day I get this moment where it's like, take a moment to be mindful,
Yeah.
But that's the counterfeit version of that. And it's funny because they choose the term mindful, but what they really mean is emptying the mind.
Yeah,
so not actually mindful, but, whatever.
I definitely delete that out of my phone.
Yeah.
So the point is, though, as believers, we really need to be focused and understand that there is an appropriate time. And I suppose the reason why I don't, yes, I pray every day, and I'm thinking about the work of God in the lives of my wife and my children, and the things that are going on, and I pray for them. I pray for you, Josh. I pray for you, and for the burden which is on your shoulders.
Definitely necessary.
I know what that's like. So I do that, but I remember when I was growing up as a young believer, and we had this group of people that. Their understanding of religiosity was that you weren't really dedicated to Christ until you were getting up and at 3 or 4 in the morning and doing a Bible study before you started your day. And I'm like, I couldn't do that. And I struggled for a long time with the fact that I just wasn't wired that way. Now that I'm old, whether I like to be or not, God's wired me that way, and I'm awake at 2:45 or 3 o'clock, whether I want to be or not. But when I was young, that was a real struggle. People saying you have to fit into this box. So I try not to fit people into a box that they have to do things at a certain time. But I do agree with you 100% that you need to have the proper mindset. And that's what the Apostle Paul's talking about here.
Yeah, I try to wake up in the morning every day and commit time to that. And I think, the situation that we find ourselves in our culture with such accessibility to vice is difficult. Like alone, I'll be honest with you. Alone this week, I've come in touch in counseling with issues of like extreme drugs, fentanyl and cocaine and meth,
heroin.
And I haven't touched that one yet, but although in the past I have, issues of marital issues, even child pornography. I've been dealing with a lot of things in terms of counseling, and without understanding. Like as Paul puts it, don't let anyone capture you with empty philosophies and high-sounding nonsense that come from human thinking, right?
Yeah, right.
Like I can't imagine dealing with these things with
in and of yourself, yes.
High-sounding human thinking, even especially with me being a biblical counselor, dealing with secular counseling,
right.
And the way that secular counseling, teaches you to, again, like empty yourself and center yourself and all of these things. I just can't imagine trying to navigate these situations that way.
Yes. So we're going to end this section today right here. With keeping in mind that it is important for you to establish an understanding of that you be grounded in your faith, that you set aside time to be remembering what God has done in your life, and that be a point of focus for you as you live, that you might be strengthened in him. Next week, we're going to pick up with the idea of empty philosophy, that we are not to be captured by that, and the danger that can be there. And so we'll pick that up next week. Let's talk a little bit about relationship. Now we've been covering the aspects of relationship for a little while now, and we've been talking particularly about the marital relationship. And we're going to talk today just some mechanical type things that I think are helpful, because you can apply these, and you should apply some of these mechanics to all of the dynamics that occur in relationship. But sometimes it's helpful just to talk about how do you deal with certain things, because what often the two areas where relationship, and particularly marital relationships, break down significantly is in dealing with communication and issues surrounding finance, which of course can come back to improper communication. And I know when I do marital counseling, premarital counseling, we normally spend at least 3 weeks on dealing with just what communication is, and then some tools that equip the potential couple to be able to survive the experience. So that's what I thought we would do today for just a little bit, some tools that might be helpful. So let's start out with just some basic things which are helpful. Or at least I find helpful, is that when I'm discussing things with my wife, and we're in an involved discussion, and I prefer. My kids used to say when they were young and they would observe their mother and I in elaborate discussion, they would say, "Are you fighting?" And I would no, we are involved in an intense discussion. Or, I would try to stay away from the idea that we were fighting, more the idea that we're involved in a involved discussion, which is not necessarily an argument. It is simply we're involved in an intense discussion, and that's okay. It's okay to be involved in those intense discussions on both sides. But one thing that I try to stay away from is I try to stay away from using the word "you." So if I'm trying to explain something and I'm talking with another person and they don't seem to be getting what it is that I'm saying, I don't say, "You don't understand." The reason I don't do that is because if I'm communicating and I want to get across an idea and I am having difficulty doing that, and it seems that I'm not getting through, my idea is not coming through in our intense discussion, if I use the word "you" and I say to somebody, "You don't understand what I'm saying," what I'm doing is I'm shifting responsibility to be on the shoulders of the individual who is receiving the information, instead of me being the one who is giving the information. And if I'm not being understood, then I have the responsibility to find a different way to say it or to clarify. And so my way of dealing with that is not to say, "You don't understand me," or "You don't understand," but is to say, "I'm not making myself clear. Let me try a different approach." And so then I will take the responsibility to try a different approach and not put that person on defensive. That's a technique that I use. I don't know, Josh. You have different techniques, and yours are very successful. But have you ever employed that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to be a lot more directive in the way that I deal with things. So I have no problem saying you need to do this, or or this is what you're saying, or so on and so forth. I think that what needs to be communicated is your own, like, as the person communicating. I think what needs to be communicated, and you find your own way to do this, is your own longing for and responsibility to seek to understand better what's being said. So if you can communicate to the other person that perhaps your understanding isn't what it should be, then I don't think that it really matters whether you're direct in saying, like, you communicated this way. So, and it really depends on the person, obviously.
Sure, and I guess what I would say in response to that is simply that yes, each person needs to develop their own style.
Yeah.
But in that, you need the tools to be able to look and see what that style is going to be. So this is one thing for you to consider.
So so for me, in directive counseling, it's important to establish consequential behavior, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's causal behavior. So, like, you did this, and so this is the outcome of what approach you took. So for me, I always try to establish that causal understanding with somebody. So this is what you said. This is how I took it. If I took it wrong, then is it because did you cause me to take it wrong? Essentially, is what I want a person to think about, and that's got to be. You can manufacture goodwill for that if you're the same. If you're the same about the things that you've said. Right. So I said this. This seems to be the outcome of it. And that's not what I wanted to accomplish. What do I need to do to change that so that I can get across my point? I think if you're generous in being vulnerable with that, then you can establish goodwill when you say to somebody, this is what you said. Did you mean to come across this way?
Yeah.
Because this is how I would take it.
Right.
So
and so that leads us into my next point. It's a good segue to go into the next point, that when I'm involved in an intense discussion, I stay away from personalization and pigeonholing the person that I'm dealing with by using what's that word you use, Josh? I don't call them names. I don't
ad hominem.
Ad hominem. I don't do ad hominem attacks, but the point of the discussion, if you're having one, the discussion needs to have a point to focus on. What are you trying to accomplish? And ad hominem attacks don't accomplish anything. If anything, they put people on the defensive. So what I try to do is I try to focus on this, which is what Josh was talking about. What are we trying to accomplish here? What's the goal? Is there an action that we're, are you frustrated because I'm acting a certain way? Are you frustrated because, I said I was going to do something and I didn't do it? Are you, so there are integrity or truthful, or there's issues that are surrounding which are the important aspect of what we need to focus on. And so I try to spend time looking at what is it that we need to deal with. In my method of problem solving is always to say, where are we now? Where do we want to get where do we want to be? How do we get there? And that eliminates all the side stuff that can come in. So have I done something? Am I not doing something? Have I, do I need to seek forgiveness because I said I was going to do something and I didn't? What are the things that I need to keep focus on rather than making ad hominem attacks on people?
Yeah, I think that one of the best things that you can ask is, what are you hearing? You know?
Yeah.
And another sort of form of that question is, what does this mean to you? It's, so like when you see somebody acting irrationally in communication, meaning that the outcome of the outcome of the comment that you made or the action that you took when you're communicating with them is not what you would expect it to be, right? So it seems irrational. I think that's what I think that you can lean on those sorts of questions, like asking the person to explain themselves, but you have to do it in a non-accusatory fashion, right? It's in literally, I'm trying to understand the situation. Something just happened here. I recognize that it's meaningful. I recognize that you're not just being childish or something like that. And so I'm going to ask you, like, what does this mean to you? I think that we're not connecting.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So one technique that people use to deal with that, or employ to deal with that, is called active listening. And really what Josh is talking about is active listening.
Right.
Where you're asking the person that you're dealing with, what did I say that you think I said?
Right. Well, what are you hearing?
What are you hearing? And allow that person to give feedback.
Yeah.
And say, this is what I heard. And so then you can confirm or deny. Well, I don't confirm or deny that I said that. Now,
Well, I think so. What people don't seem to understand is that words are containers for ideas.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of people who think that words have only one way of being interpreted.
Oh my goodness.
And the truth is that you can have many people can take the same facts and interpret them differently.
Yes.
Depending on a whole bunch of factors. So what needs to happen is a meeting of the minds in any sort of communication, and you need to deal with people without assuming that they have the same verbiage as you when you come into conflict, right?
Yes.
So when you come into conflict, then you got to look at definitions, and you got to ask yourself again, what does this mean to you? Because what's the adage about the thumbs up? Like giving somebody a thumbs up in America means positivity, but somewhere else it's like flipping them off or something.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of thing. People take for granted language. But the truth is that underneath the container of language, so we're going to talk about logos and rhema in the Greek. That's what we talk about, right? The container of language, rhema, versus the idea of language, logos.
Right.
So when or logos to us English speakers, when you're talking about that, you have to look for the idea behind it. And a lot of people carry messaging where they've been taught to interpret a word a certain way.
Yes.
A great example of that is father, right? Well, for a lot of people, father in this generation is patriarchy.
Right.
And patriarchy is oppression. And that has to do with a lot of factors. It has to do with the fact that there's a lot of abandonment, for instance, and there's a lot of male toxicity, which that is an actual thing where males are overly dominant and so on and so forth. So if you talk to somebody in like an evangelical circle, 9 times out of 10, they're going to see father as positive, at least right now.
Right.
But outside that, father is seen as domineering, and so you can't. And then you come from a Roman Catholic circle, and then father is priestly, and you can't just take language for granted. So it's helpful when you're using language to ask the question, what does that mean to you? What are you hearing?
Because it then provides clarity, and so that you're on the same page, and it will then allow you, if somebody gives you feedback that no, you said father, for example, or you present an idea of father, but they see it as a negative term, then that behooves you then to change your tactic and to use words that are conveying what you actually mean. And that's why it becomes your responsibility.
Yes. Now, I will say that once you've established terms, then if a person refuses once you've established reasonable terms, if a person refuses to adhere to those reasonable terms, so you've said, this is what Father means to me, and so when I'm saying it, I'm not saying all these other things, and the person gets that, but they just want to be petty about it, then that is no longer your issue morally. It is your decision whether you want to live in the conflict of it.
Right. You may end up having to then focus for a short time on establishing what's a workable word format that you can both agree to.
Right. So, like, where that applies practically is from parents to children.
Yes.
Or in the classroom where people are like offended because you used a certain word. But once once you have an understanding of what that word is, as a teacher, there's no need for you to constantly go back and apologize the word.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, so and that leads us into our discussion of what I call the conversational game of catch, and we're going to leave that as a cliffhanger because we're pressed for time. We're going to leave that as a cliffhanger and take up next week, starting off with an understanding of conversation as a game of catch. And if you played catch, hey, this is springtime. So springtime, people are getting out the baseball and doing baseball and the glove and the ball and stuff. Think about a game of catch, and we'll be talking about that next week. With that, let's go into our segment. What's your take?
All right, then.
I love that. And that's and you know what? That's kind of what where we're at today. Wow. I'll just briefly touch on these. We are living in volatile times. The war which is going on in Ukraine, with Russia being the aggressor, Putin in particular, but Russia being the aggressor, they believed that they could walk in and they could occupy Ukraine and crush them within 3 days, and we're now extending into week 4.
Right.
And Russia's having some issues, and NATO is having some issues in trying to have some consistency in how it's going to approach things because of the Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and yet it sits right there on the border of several countries that are. For example, Poland, which is next to Ukraine demographically, refugees are pouring out of Ukraine into Poland because of what's happening. And so there's this back and forth about how do we deal with this and the supplying of weapons. So NATO is supplying weapons who the United States is one of the principals in NATO for that type of technology, and yet we don't want to be involved. So what they're trying to say is we don't want to be involved in a war, World War III. But so there's this very, very difficult, tenuous stuff that's going on over there right now. Our president decided that it would be a good thing for him to go over to NATO and to the NATO alliance and talk to the leaders at NATO. And I'm just repeating to you what has happened. I'll limit my analysis for now, but just to say that this person has created 3 faux pas this week that are major for potentially dragging the U.S. into a war. And the first one is that when he was asked about the potential for Putin to use mechanisms that are forbidden by the Geneva Convention, for example, the use of nerve gas or various chemicals, so chemical warfare. During World War II, the Nazis developed various forms of chemical weaponry that were deadly and were tormenting and how it is that they affected people. Nerve gas, so you've heard of things like ricin, mustard gas, all those types of things. Well, after World War II, there was an agreement that these things will no longer be allowed. So, but the United States has a stockpile of those, and actually, many of them were up at the Hanford property in Washington, and has slowly been destroying that stockpile per agreement. And Russia was supposed to do the same thing, but they still have ample supply of those. And so the question was asked by the press: what would happen if Russia used nerve gas or some type of chemical warfare? How would the United States and NATO respond? And President Biden, off of the cuff, said that we would respond in kind. Now, what?
Like we would use nerve gas also?
Yeah, he said we would respond in kind. Now, this sent that statement is, first of all, in violation of U.S. policy that we do not use those types of deals.
No, we just assassinate.
We're going to talk about that in a moment.
Okay.
We're going to talk about it in a moment because no, we don't.
Okay.
And
we just hire contractors who will?
No, the United States is not supposed to be involved in that. But there are policy things that have been set in place that, and so basically he made this statement that we would respond in kind. And then the White House had to spend several days, even over this last weekend, trying to back that off and say, no, that's not what he said that, but he really didn't mean that. Okay, the second thing that he did was he visited the troops over in the NATO. We have about upwards of 8,000 troops which are assigned to NATO and over in that area. And during his pep talk to the troops there, he alluded to the fact, in fact, he outright told them that they would understand the gravity of the situation in the Ukraine when they were actually there, and that they would be going there and seeing that. Well, the policy of the United States, even in regard to NATO, is that there will be no troops on the ground from the United States into Ukraine. So we will not get ourselves involved in another Afghanistan. And he directly told the troops there that they were going to be going into the Ukraine. So the White House tried to back that off and give a different spin into. Now, you got to keep in mind, this is not petty, because this is the leader of the free world who is talking here. So he's made two faux pas already, which are in clear violation of U.S. policy and intention. And then his third one this week, which again just sent a firestorm, is that he made a speech while he was in the Ukraine. So he made a speech there, and he was freewheeling it, which for President Biden is dangerous. He was freewheeling it, and he clearly said that, as Josh just alluded to, that Putin needed to be taken out. And needed to be, the illusion being that he needed to be basically what the diplomatic term is regime change.
Sure.
And we have had disastrous consequences when it comes to regime change. You might remember, well, many of you don't, because you don't follow history quite the way that I do. But during the during the Obama administration, of which Biden was the vice president during the Obama administration, under Hillary Clinton as the Secretary of State, they sought to bring about a regime change in Benghazi, which ended up in disaster. And it is U.S. policy that we do not send in assassins, that we do not replace the leaders of other countries and put in puppets. That's the policy. So this individual who is the leader of the free world,
that's what they were trying to do with Benghazi.
And it was a disaster.
The point I'm making is it's not exactly.
It was not authorized or allowed.
Well,
and except that Obama did that because
we don't think that there's black book operations.
I'm not going to talk. Black ops is what it's called, not black book.
It's
the point. Okay. The point is
black ops and black book are two different things.
The point is this is not a message that you send to the rest of the world that we want to eliminate Putin and bring in a regime change. That's not. Every country is considered sovereign. Now, whether you agree with me or don't, that as you're alluding to, Josh, that we have been sloppy about that in the past. Nonetheless, as the leader of the free world, you do not make those statements publicly. And Biden,
you don't feel like Trump.
Oh no.
Okay.
No. Clearly, Trump did not, and he did not suggest certain things as well. What the left were basically saying then is that, in regard to this statement, was that President Biden is having a Reagan moment.
Okay.
And they tried to allude to the fact that when President Reagan said, "Tear this wall down," that it was the same thing as we're going to eliminate Putin.
Well, I don't want to get
the same thing.
I don't want to get too much into the politics of it, but it shouldn't surprise us when you have. I don't want to get it too much into this conversation either because we'll probably talk about it in Culture Insanity. But when you have Will Smith, right?
Oh yeah, the bitch slap.
When you have the slap that reverberated around the world, when you have this incredibly memeable moment that happens in a group of people who are intensely liberal, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So there's an interesting Ben Shapiro did an interesting commentary on it where he was just talking about.
Oh, I'd love to hear what Ben said.
Yeah, there he does an interesting commentary on it where he's talking about the way that microaggressions, like the way that we perceive these, like even now a joke from a comedian is viewed as actionable, anger, basically.
Yeah.
It's worth you fighting over, and so it's not surprising when it seeps so far into culture now that it surprises even the people that, are calling for canceling people and like killing people who disagree with you and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Adam Carolla was talking a little bit about that too.
And Biden is, Biden sits at the high supreme seat of the liberal, the liberal agenda right now. And so
yeah, supposed to be a moderate, but not really.
But so it's not surprising from that standpoint that,
So my point is
he's making comments.
He's making comments which have potential disastrous consequences. And then when the press confronts him about it, he won't walk anything back. He will even go to the point of saying, "I didn't say that."
But now, are you certain that he doesn't remember?
Well, that's a secondary issue that we could talk about.
Maybe he actually
whether the 25th Amendment should be invoked or not.
That seems disastrous as well.
Yeah, because then you'd put Kamala Harris and wow. So just like I said, you need to talk for. Listen, you may not be involved in all this. This may not be your cup of tea. But you not only do you need to pray for Pastor Josh as your leader, and
at ABF,
at ABF, and what he does, you need to pray for God's hand to be clearly in what's happening in the world today.
Well, you need to pray for Biden and all those people.
Yeah,
pray for Will Smith.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sad for him.
Yeah, so that's my take on it. Wow. Yes, I just pray that God would be sovereign in all these things, and I cringe every time I hear some of the things going on. Okay, so let's move on with what's up with that. Now I've got a positive what's up with that, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I was going to talk a little bit about the bitch slap from Will Smith, but Josh might talk about that in Culture on Saturday, so I'm not.
I hear that some people are referring to it as the Hitch slap.
Yeah, well, good. Yeah, because of his movie Hitch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just say my take on that is that what we have in full glory is I'll put out there as a teaser that my take on it is what we have
shaking
in
my
full
head already.
glory is celebrity privilege present in high fashion.
Oh, you controlled yourself there.
Just as with Jesse
Smollett. You could hardly call him a celebrity.
Well, he thinks he's one.
Well, okay.
Yeah, he thinks he's one.
He was in that one show on Fox for a little bit, and then he was a Mighty Duck.
I'm taking him at his word that he's a celebrity.
His sister's pretty famous though.
Okay, and see, I never heard of her, so I don't know.
She was Michelle Tanner's best friend on Full House.
Okay.
When she was a kid.
Yeah, cool. Let's talk about something positive. So rarely when we do what's up with that, because there are just so many crazy things going on. They're kind of humorous or just kind of make you question what's up with that. But occasionally you do get a positive one. And I was watching the end of a 60 Minutes presentation for those of you that aren't old people and don't watch those kinds of things.
I record them. Sometimes they have titles that make me want to watch them.
Yeah. But then it falls apart when you open it up.
I'm like, I could watch, a rerun of Stargate, or I could watch 60 Minutes.
Tough choice.
I'll go with Stargate.
Yeah, tough choice.
Pluto, the streaming network, has just decided to launch a 24-hour Stargate channel.
Oh, interesting.
It was also acquired by Amazon. None of this matters to you. Anyway, keep going.
So there is
not Pluto, but
yes, I get it. After World War II, there's a foundation that was formed particularly after the showing List. Spielberg's presentation it really spoke to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece.
And so after the movie, one of the things that came about is that there was a foundation which was made specifically to deal with Holocaust matters, and the term that is used in the Hebrew community for the Holocaust is Shoah. And so it's called the Shoah Foundation. And they started compiling data from Holocaust survivors so that they would have some type of a database.
Well, and they're
as these people got older.
Very old now.
Yeah.
There's not that many left.
No. And so they've been working on this for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So they've got this huge database. Well, there are still some survivors that are alive.
Yeah, not that many though.
And this gal who,
and they were all like children during the Holocaust.
Yeah. So this one person, the person that they used to start this project that they're working on was 11 years old.
There you go.
And now he's in his 80s.
Yeah.
And in fact, he died.
Okay.
He died, but in the very beginning of this project, so there was this woman who said, having the written documented information is cool, but that's not enough, particularly with video and AI and all this stuff that's going on. The technology that we have today, we can do better.
Yeah.
And so what she did is she went to the Shoah Foundation and she said, this is my idea. I want to have actual interviews with Holocaust survivors where they can answer people's questions.
Yeah, that's creepy.
And well, it is because
It's
even
that stuff they're doing with the new the the Hereditary stuff where
Yeah.
it's like they make like your old pictures come to life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she convinced, later married him, but she convinced the director of Shoah
She was on a mission.
that he should indulge her idea and work on it. And so they began this project where they have done now thousands of them, but they're beginning to take the library and create a library of people. And I think they've got 4 museums around the country, Holocaust museums where you can go in, and you can go in and you can actually sit down
And talk
with
to a virtual
Holocaust
character.
provider and ask questions. And the artificial intelligence of the computer searches this huge database. When they were putting this together, so you've got cameras from every angle, and you've got microphones going on, and you've got all this stuff. And so they asked. It took them a week of just asking every question that they could think of the participants,
Yeah.
so that the computer can go in and search this huge database when you ask a question. And so you go in and you sit down and you ask questions of this Holocaust survivor, and they talk about their life experience.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's like a Alexa Nazi edition.
Kind of, yeah. But
Well, not Nazi edition. It would be Shoah edition. Holocaust edition Alexa.
Shoah edition, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is.
So is it an AI? Like it's like you're looking at the person and
Yes.
they talk back to you, and does it load? Like you ask it a question and then it loads, or you ask it a question and then it loads it, but it looks like you're still having conversation with this person.
Well, what you're doing is you're sitting in a room, and the person is sitting, and the person that they used in order to do the prototype on this,
Right.
He said it was exhausting because he had to for a week.
He's wearing the balls.
He
all
had to
over
wear
him.
the same exact clothes.
Man, that sounds terrible.
And he sat in the same exact chair, and they did all this filming. So, but the outwork of it, to answer your question, Josh, is what happens is that you go in, you sit down, and you ask a question just like you're having a conversation.
Yeah. So is it seamless? That's the thing.
Yes,
that I'm
it
wondering.
is. It
Okay,
is
so it's like
seamless.
so it's a virtual person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. That's
And
cool.
the reason why they were using all the different cameras, and they had this thing that was like a dome.
Yeah.
That you sat in with cameras from every angle, and they lovingly call it the bubble now. But because they wanted, as technology develops, they wanted eventually to be able to use hologram technology.
That makes sense.
And create a hologram. But you go in, and you have to ask a question.
Yeah.
And then the questions that you answer, the database then searches this mega database for addressing that specific question, and then the person, and then it talks back to you just like
It
you're
just
carrying
takes
on
over
a
and
conversation.
spits it out. It's a NPC, like a highly advanced non-playable character with an AI with a virtual skin over it, so that it's seamless in how it presents itself to the graphic
it's
user
amazing.
interface.
It's amazing. So
It's actually really simple if you think about. Anyway,
so the reason why
I'm sure William Shatner is already on it.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm thinking about this from a technology standpoint, and what's up with that, is we have progressed so far in our technology that that's, I don't know about you, but I mean, that's just amazing to me. That you can walk in, you can sit down and have a conversation with somebody who's dead, and they can still carry on a conversation like
yes,
like they were there.
I suppose, but really no, from the standpoint of it's just a database.
Well, you're not impressed because you're from this generation.
Well, I'm not impressed because I understand the magic behind it. I think the user interface is what would be impressive, right? But like it's really simple. Like you just use a search feature to pull up a pre-existing recording, and then it plays through a user interface that's seamless using AI. But we do crazy things with CGI. I'm more impressed with the application of it.
Sure.
I love the application. That's a great idea.
It's a great idea.
It's also going to be used a lot for making idols.
It may not be that overwhelming to you, Josh, but I remember the difference between using a Thomas guide versus GPS.
Well, you remember when all you had was a radio.
I remember walking in the mall
have...
with your kids, commenting to your mother, "Why does that person holding a brick to their head?"
Right, the big gray Zach Morris bricks.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when you were a kid, they didn't have color TVs.
Yes, they did, Josh. But I do remember the first time. Yes, they did. But I remember the first time that I watched The Wizard of Oz in color.
Right, back in 1939.
You're so funny. All righty. Well, we're going to wrap up our time today together. It is time to do that. We're going to wrap up on time. And do you have anything else? I hope everybody enjoyed today. I did.
I am looking up color TVs. I need to know. The audience needs to know when color television first became a thing.
My father bought a console Curtis Mathis color TV. We were living at a house on 84th.
Okay, hold on. I stand corrected. In 1944, Baird gave the world's first demonstration of a practical, fully electronic color television display. However, in the United States, commercially competing color standards were developed, finally resulting in the NTSC standard for color that retained compatibility. Okay. Although the NTSC color standard was proclaimed in 1953 and limited programming became available, it was not until the early 1970s that color television in North America began to outsell. Was not standardized until the 1960s. So yes, they had the technology, but they didn't become commonplace. It wasn't commonplace, and they didn't become commercial until way after the technology was there.
Right.
So, I think.
So if you're interested in some of this,
I think you could say Pastor Monty didn't have color TV.
No, we had a color TV, Curtis Mathis console model. But
how old were you though?
If you're interested in some of these different things about Pastor Monty's past,
then you can go visit him at the Smithsonian. His hologram that we're going.
Yeah, you should visit a hologram that we're putting together with a database of my life.
You heard it here first. Pastor Monty is going to be made into a hologram. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to make you into a statue that you can talk to. But we're going to make sure you have a power cord so you can't chase us.
And when for many years when I preached, Josh, one of the things that I reminded people is that we need to have practical examples of how to live for Christ from people you can relate to. That's why I rejected the whole idea of what would Jesus do. But imagine if you could ask, what would Pastor Monty do, and you could pull up a database.
Wow, I find that to be slightly blasphemous. What?
All right, we're going to close right there.
Okay, sure. We'll do that. So, let me find my spot because that threw me for a loop. Yeah. If you're someone who is seeking answers or you want to know more about your faith, if you're new to Jesus Christ of the Bible, we'd like to help you. So check us out at abfpdx.org, where all of our shows are. We are part of the Vigilance Radio Network, along with other shows such as, I don't see the slide on the screen, but it's going to show up at some point, such as Culture Insanity, which we might be having soon to talk about the whole slap that reverberated around the world. The hitch slap, if you will, and the Bible with Pastor Adam, and even our weekly sermons. Those happen every week. There's new content on the VRN every week, at least with our weekly sermons. So if you want to connect to all those things, check us out online. You can go to our website. You can go to Facebook, all of that stuff. If you want to donate to us, there's ways to do that. And so check that out at ABFPDX. You get new content from Pastor Monty each week, Tuesdays at 11 a.m. We will see you then. I'm Pastor Josh, your co-host and the senior pastor here at the church. And this has been Pastor Monty.
The views presented in this program are not meant to express the specific views of the Lafayette Bible Fellowship.